In the depths of the northern wilderness, where ancient pines whispered secrets older than kingdoms, and moonlight carved silver paths through endless shadows, Melis had learned that solitude was both sanctuary and prison. 3 years she had lived in her forest cabin, 3 years since she'd chosen exile over the suffocating expectations of pack life. 3 years of convincing herself that the ache in her chest was freedom, not loneliness, that the silence echoing through empty rooms was peace, not the hollow sound of a heart that had forgotten how to hope. She was an Omega, in a world that measured worth by dominance, gentleness in a society that rewarded strength, a woman who had dared to believe that choosing herself over service made her selfish rather than wise. The forest had become her refuge from a culture that saw her tender heart as weakness, her independence as defiance, her refusal to bow as a flaw that needed correction. But on this storm-torn autumn night, as wind howled through the trees like the cries of lost souls, and rain lashed against her windows with desperate fingers, Melis would discover that some prisons are of our own making, and some freedoms can only be found in the courage to care for something beyond ourselves. She had built walls around her heart to keep the world out, never suspecting that one day, something small and broken and infinitely precious would arrive at her door, carrying with it the power to shatter every defense she'd ever built. Tonight, 3 soft knocks would change everything. Tonight, an Omega who had learned to live without love would remember why hearts were made to shelter others. And in saving one lost child, she would discover that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is not turning away from the world, but opening your arms to embrace what it has cast aside. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The storm arrived without warning, as autumn storms often did in the northern forests. Melis pressed her face to the rain-streaked window of her small cabin, watching the ancient pines bend and sway under the wind's relentless assault. Thunder rolled across the sky, like the footsteps of angry gods, and lightning split the darkness in jagged silver veins. She pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned back to the warmth of her modest home. The fire crackled cheerfully in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the hand-carved furniture her father had made before his death. Books lined the walls, her only companions these past 3 years since she'd chosen exile over submission. Melis had always been different. Too quiet for pack dynamics, too gentle for the harsh hierarchies that governed werewolf society. As an Omega, she was expected to serve, to submit, to find her worth in caring for others who would never truly see her as an equal. But Melis had seen what became of Omegas who bent too far, who gave too much. She'd watched her mother fade away piece by piece, her spirit crushed under the weight of a pack's expectations. So when her 18th birthday arrived with its inevitable pressure to choose a mate and fulfill her purpose, Melis had made a different choice. She'd taken her inheritance, this small cabin deep in neutral territory, and disappeared into the wilderness where pack laws couldn't reach her. The loneliness was a price she'd learned to pay. She settled into her reading chair with a cup of chamomile tea, opening to a well-worn page of poetry. The storm could rage all it wanted. She was safe here, hidden away from a world that had never understood her gentle heart. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps, barely audible above the storm's fury. Melis froze, her cup halfway to her lips. No one knew where she lived. No one came this deep into the forest, especially not during weather like this. Another knock, weaker this time. Setting down her tea with trembling hands, Melis approached the door. Her wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin, sensing something important, something that would change everything. But the scent that reached her through the wooden barrier wasn't threatening. It was young, frightened, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. "Please," came a voice so small it might have been the wind. "Please help." Melis threw open the door. On her doorstep lay a child who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, wrapped in a thin, sodden blanket. His hair was dark as midnight, plastered to his skull by the rain, and his small body shook with cold and exhaustion. But it was his eyes that stole her breath, ancient gold in a face too young, wide with fear and pain that no child should ever know. He wasn't entirely human. She could smell it on him, the wild, complex scent of shifter blood, but layered with something else, something that made her wolf whine in recognition and submission. "Oh, sweet child," Melis whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "What happened to you?" The boy tried to speak, but only a whimper emerged. His lips were blue with cold, his breathing shallow and labored. Whatever had brought him here, it could wait. Right now, he needed warmth and safety. Melis gathered him into her arms, surprised by how light he was, how fragile. He molded against her chest like he belonged there, his small hands fisting in her shawl with desperate strength. "You're safe now," she murmured, carrying him inside and kicking the door closed against the storm. "I've got you." She settled him on the sofa near the fire, quickly gathering quilts and blankets to wrap around his shivering form. His breathing began to even out in the warmth, though his eyes remained fixed on her face with an intensity that was both grateful and wary. "What's your name, little one?" she asked gently, tucking the blankets around him. He opened his mouth, closed it, then pointed to his throat and shook his head. Whether he couldn't speak from trauma or injury, Melis couldn't tell, but she nodded understandingly. "That's all right. We don't need words right now." She brushed his damp hair back from his forehead, noting the fevered heat of his skin. "Let me get you something warm to drink." As she prepared hot milk with honey, Melis noticed something she'd missed before, a piece of paper tied around the boy's neck with a length of string. Her hands stilled as she carefully untied it, the paper damp but still legible. The handwriting was feminine, hurried, and stained with what looked suspiciously like tears. "I don't know who else to trust. Please save him. They will kill him if they find him. I'm sorry." The paper slipped from Melis's fingers as tears blurred her vision. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob that came from somewhere deep in her chest. Someone had been desperate enough to leave this precious child with a stranger, trusting that kindness might still exist in a world that had clearly shown them cruelty. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, looking back at the boy. He was watching her with those two knowing eyes, and she saw the moment he understood that she'd read the note. His small face crumpled, and silent tears began to track down his cheeks. Melis's heart shattered. Without hesitation, she returned to the sofa and gathered him into her arms again. He clung to her with desperate strength, his small body racked with silent sobs that spoke of grief too large for someone so young. "Shh," she whispered, rocking him gently. "It's going to be all right. You're not alone anymore." She held him until his tears subsided, and exhaustion claimed him. His head grew heavy against her shoulder, his breathing deep and even. But even in sleep, his fingers remained twisted in her shawl, as if afraid she might disappear. Melis carried him to her own bed, the only one in the small cabin, and tucked him under the thick down comforter. She arranged pillows around him so he wouldn't roll off, then settled into the chair beside the bed to keep watch. As the storm continued to rage outside, she studied the child's sleeping face. There was something familiar about his features, something that tugged at memories she couldn't quite place. The noble line of his nose, the proud set of his jaw even in sleep. These were the features of good bloodlines, of wolves born to lead rather than follow. But more than that, there was power in him. She could sense it even now, sleeping and vulnerable as he was. This wasn't just any shifter child. This was someone important, someone whose absence would be noticed and mourned, or hunted. The thought sent a chill down her spine. Who had written that note? His mother? A nursemaid? And what kind of danger could possibly threaten a child so young that death was the alternative to discovery? Melis pulled her shawl tighter around herself and settled in for a long night of watching. Tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Tonight, she would simply be what this child needed most, a sanctuary in the storm. The boy stirred in his sleep, a small whimper escaping his lips. Without thinking, Melis reached out to smooth his hair, whispering soft words of comfort. His breathing settled, and she saw the hint of a smile cross his sleeping face. In that moment, something shifted in her chest. The careful walls she'd built around her heart, the barriers that had protected her from the pain of caring too much, began to crack. She'd spent 3 years convincing herself that she was meant to be alone, that her gentle nature was a weakness in a world that valued strength above all else. But perhaps she'd been wrong. Perhaps her gentleness wasn't a weakness at all. Perhaps it was exactly what this lost child needed. Outside, the storm began to calm, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of tempest was beginning. The kind that starts when a lonely heart finally finds its purpose, when an Omega's instinct to nurture meets a child in desperate need of protection. Melis settled back in her chair, her hand resting protectively on the edge of the bed. Whatever tomorrow brought, whatever dangers had driven this child to her door, She would face them, because some things were worth fighting for, even if you'd never learned how to fight. And sometimes, the greatest strength came not from claws and fangs, but from the simple, stubborn refusal to turn away from someone who needed help. Dawn broke gray and subdued over the forest, the previous night's storm having washed the world clean. Mylis woke in her chair, her neck stiff from sleeping upright, but her first thought was for the child. Her eyes immediately went to the bed where he lay curled under the thick comforter, still deeply asleep but no longer shivering. She moved quietly to the window, peering through the glass at the forest beyond. The ancient pines stood tall and proud, their branches heavy with moisture that caught the early morning light like scattered diamonds. Everything appeared peaceful, normal, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. A soft sound from the bed drew her attention back to the child. He was stirring, those remarkable golden eyes blinking open with the slow confusion of awakening in an unfamiliar place. For a moment, fear flickered across his small features, but when his gaze found her, relief replaced the panic. "Good morning, little one," Mylis said softly, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" The boy sat up slowly, wincing as if movement caused him pain. Now that she could see him properly in daylight, Mylis noticed things that had escaped her attention in the storm's chaos. There were faint bruises along his arms, partially healed cuts on his hands, and a thin scar along his left temple that looked recent, but was already fading with supernatural speed. Someone had hurt this child. The realization made her wolf snarl beneath her skin, a protective fury she'd never experienced before flooding her system. "Are you hungry?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain calm and gentle. "I could make some breakfast." The boy nodded eagerly, and she was relieved to see some color returning to his pale cheeks. Whatever ordeal he'd endured, he was resilient, a trait that would serve him well in the days to come. In the kitchen, Mylis prepared a simple meal of scrambled eggs, toast with honey, and fresh milk. The domestic routine helped calm her racing thoughts, though she found herself glancing frequently toward the bed where the child sat watching her with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. When she brought him the tray, he ate with the careful manners of someone who'd been taught proper etiquette, but also with the desperate hunger of someone who hadn't eaten in days. She sat beside him on the bed, offering encouraging smiles when he looked up at her nervously. "My name is Mylis," she said when he'd finished eating. "Can you tell me yours?" The boy opened his mouth, then closed it, frustration flickering across his features. He pointed to his throat again and shook his head, but this time he also tapped his temple and made a gesture that suggested confusion rather than inability. "You can't remember?" Mylis asked gently. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "That's all right," she said quickly, reaching out to touch his hand. Sometimes when we're very frightened, our minds protect us by hiding things that are too painful to remember. It doesn't mean they're gone forever. The child's small fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength, and she felt a jolt of something electric pass between them. For a moment, images flashed through her mind that weren't her own. A woman's face, beautiful but terrified, pressed against glass, the sound of breaking wood and angry voices, the sensation of being lifted and carried through darkness, while someone whispered desperate prayers. Mylis gasped, pulling back. The boy's eyes were wide with shock, his mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. "You felt that too, didn't you?" she whispered. He nodded slowly, wonder replacing fear in his expression. What was this child? Pack bonds could sometimes create emotional connections between members, but she'd never heard of anything like this. The flash of memories had been so vivid, so immediate, as if she'd experienced them herself. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. This wasn't the soft, desperate tapping of the night before. This was authoritative, demanding attention. The boy's reaction was immediate and visceral. He scrambled backward on the bed, pulling the comforter over his head as his entire body began to shake. The scent of his terror filled the room, so strong it made Mylis's eyes water. "Stay here," she whispered, gently pulling the blanket back enough to see his face. "I'll handle this. You're safe." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure they were true. Mylis walked to the door on unsteady legs, her wolf pacing anxiously beneath her skin. Through the small window, she could see 3 figures standing on her porch, 2 men in dark clothing, and a woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. They carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of authority, and the scent that reached her through the door made her stomach drop. "Royal Guard," She'd only smelled that particular combination of power and privilege once before, years ago when the Alpha King's entourage had passed through her old pack's territory. It was a scent that spoke of absolute authority, of wolves so high in the hierarchy that their very presence demanded submission. What could they possibly want with her? Unless... Malis glanced back toward the bedroom, where the child remained hidden under the blankets. The noble features, the healing speed, the strange power that hummed beneath his skin. Pieces of a puzzle began falling into place with terrible clarity. Another knock, more insistent this time. "We know you're in there," called a deep male voice. "We mean no harm, but we need to speak with you." Milas took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. The 3 wolves standing on her porch were everything she'd expected and more. The 2 men flanked a woman who was clearly their leader. Tall, elegant, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. All 3 wore the midnight blue of the royal house, their clothing practical but expensively made. "Milas Cunningham," the woman said, and it wasn't a question. "My name is Commander Sarah Blackthorne. We need to discuss the child." "I don't know what you're talking about," Milas replied, though she knew the lie was transparent. These wolves could probably smell the boy's scent all over her, could read the truth in her nervous posture. Commander Blackthorne's expression softened slightly. "May we come in? This conversation would be better held in private." Milas wanted to refuse, to slam the door, and pretend this wasn't happening. But she could sense the power these wolves carried, could feel it pressing against her like a physical weight. They weren't asking permission so much as showing courtesy she probably didn't deserve. She stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The 3 guards arranged themselves in her small living area with military precision, their eyes taking in every detail of the modest cabin. Commander Blackthorne settled into the chair opposite the sofa, gesturing for Milas to sit. "Where is Prince Kale?" she asked without preamble. The words hit Milas like a physical blow. Prince, of course. She should have recognized the signs, should have understood why his very presence made her wolf want to bow in submission. "Is that his name?" she heard herself ask. "Kale?" Something like relief flashed across the commander's face. "So he is here." Milas looked toward the bedroom, where she could hear the faint sound of whimpering. The child, Prince Kale, was terrified, and every instinct she possessed screamed at her to protect him. "He can't remember," she said quietly, "and he's frightened. Whatever happened to him was an attempt on his life," Commander Blackthorne finished. 3 nights ago, rebels infiltrated the royal compound. They killed his personal guard, his nursemaid, and very nearly succeeded in killing the prince himself. The words painted a picture so horrific that Milas felt sick. "He's just a child. How could anyone?" "Because he's not just any child," one of the male guards interjected. "He's the heir to the Northern Crown, the future Alpha King. His death would have thrown our people into civil war." Milas thought of the note, of the desperate words written by someone who'd known they were sending a child into the unknown rather than letting him face certain death. Who saved him? Who brought him here? Commander Blackthorne's expression grew pained. His nursemaid, Lydia. She'd been with the royal family for 20 years, helped raise Prince Kyle from birth. When the attack came, she managed to get him out of the compound, but she was badly wounded. The commander paused, visibly struggling with emotion. "She died getting him to safety. We found her body 2 days ago, along with evidence that she'd brought him this direction." "But why here?" Milas asked. "Why my cabin?" The 3 guards exchanged glances, and Commander Blackthorne leaned forward. "What do you know about your mother's family, Milas?" The question caught her off guard. "My mother? She died when I was 10. She was just a Pac Omega. Nothing special. Her maiden name was Moonwater," the commander said quietly. "Her grandmother served as nursemaid to the previous Alpha King. Your family has a history of loyalty to the crown that goes back generations." Milas stared at her, processing this information. "You're saying Lydia brought him here because of my bloodline?" "We're saying she brought him to the one person she knew could be trusted with his life," Commander Blackthorne replied. "Your great-grandmother saved the previous king's life during an assassination attempt. It's a debt the royal family has never forgotten." A soft sound from the bedroom drew everyone's attention. Prince Kale stood in the doorway, his small frame nearly swallowed by one of Milas's oversized nightgowns. His golden eyes were fixed on Commander Blackthorne with a mixture of recognition and uncertainty. "My prince," the commander said, dropping to one knee. The 2 male guards immediately followed suit. Malus watched as something flickered in the boy's eyes, confusion giving way to memory, piece by piece. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he was standing directly in front of the kneeling commander. "Sarah?" His voice was hoarse from disuse, barely above a whisper, but the word was clear. "Yes, Your Highness, it's me." Prince Kael looked back at Malus, his expression uncertain. She could see the war playing out in his young face, the pull of familiarity and safety these guards represented, against the bond he'd formed with the woman who'd sheltered him through his darkest hour. "Will you come home with us, my prince?" Commander Blackthorn asked gently. "Your father is frantic with worry." But instead of answering, Prince Kael walked back to Malus. He climbed onto the sofa beside her and pressed himself against her side, his small hand slipping into hers. "May," he said quietly, the first word he'd spoken to her. It wasn't his inability to speak that had kept him silent. It was trauma, fear, and the protective walls his young mind had built around memories too terrible to face. "What do you want, little one?" she asked softly. "Stay with you," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Malus felt her heart crack open. This powerful, precious child wanted to stay with her, a nobody Omega living alone in the woods. But she knew it was impossible. He had a father who loved him, a kingdom that needed him, a destiny that stretched far beyond her small cabin. "Your Highness," she said gently, "your father needs to know you're safe. There are people who love you and have been scared for you." Prince Kael's grip on her hand tightened. "Come with me?" The simple question hung in the air like a prayer. Malus looked up to find Commander Blackthorn watching her with an unreadable expression. "That might not be a simple matter," the commander said carefully. "The court has very strict protocols regarding—" "Sarah." Prince Kael's voice was stronger now, carrying the unconscious authority of someone born to rule. "She comes." The finality in his tone brooked no argument, even from a commander of the royal guard. Malus stared at him in amazement. This was the future king speaking, and despite his young age, the power in his voice was undeniable. Commander Blackthorn inclined her head. "As you wish, Your Highness." Malus felt the world shifting around her, her quiet, solitary life dissolving like morning mist. "I can't just leave. I have a life here. Responsibilities. May." Prince Kael turned those golden eyes on her, and she saw depths of wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Please, I need you." And there it was, the truth she'd been avoiding since the moment she'd opened her door to a frightened child in a storm. She was already lost, already bound to this boy by something deeper than duty or obligation. The protective instincts he'd awakened in her wouldn't be satisfied by simply returning him to safety. She needed to know he was all right, needed to be certain he was protected and loved. She needed to be the sanctuary he could return to when the weight of crown and kingdom became too heavy for small shoulders to bear. "All right," she whispered, and watched relief bloom across his face like sunrise. "I'll come with you." Commander Blackthorn stood, her expression both relieved and concerned. "We should leave within the hour. The rebels are still at large, and the longer Prince Kael remains away from the protection of the royal compound, the greater the danger." As Malus gathered her few belongings, she caught glimpses of Prince Kael through the open bedroom door. He sat on her bed, touching the quilts and pillows with careful fingers, as if trying to memorize the place that had been his sanctuary. When he thought no one was looking, she saw him slip one of her handkerchiefs, the one that smelled most strongly of her scent, into his pocket. The gesture broke her heart and mended it all at once. Within an hour, they were ready to leave. Malus locked her cabin door with hands that trembled only slightly, knowing that when she returned, if she returned, nothing would ever be the same. Prince Kael slipped his hand into hers as they walked toward the royal carriage that waited at the edge of her clearing. His grip was steady, trusting, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle over her like a mantle. She was no longer just Malus the hermit, the Omega who'd chosen solitude over service. She was now the guardian of a prince, the protector of a kingdom's future, the woman who'd answered a desperate plea for help and found her purpose in the process. As the carriage carried them away from the forest and toward an uncertain future, Malus looked down at the sleeping child in her arms and made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever dangers awaited them at the royal court, she would keep him safe. She would be the sanctuary he needed, the anchor that kept him grounded when the storms of politics and power threatened to sweep him away. Because sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with claws and fangs, but with love and stubbornness, and the simple refusal to abandon those who needed protection. And sometimes, an Omega's gentle heart was exactly the weapon a kingdom needed most. The royal compound rose from the mountainside like something from a fairy tale, its white stone walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. Towers stretched toward the sky, banners snapped in the mountain wind, and everywhere Malis looked, she saw evidence of wealth and power beyond her comprehension. Guards in ceremonial armor lined the approach, their faces stoic but their relief palpable as the royal carriage passed through the gates. Prince Kale had awakened as they'd begun the climb toward his home, pressing his face to the carriage window with an expression of wonder mixed with trepidation. His small hand remained firmly clasped in Malis's, as if she were his anchor to safety in a world that had recently shown him how dangerous it could be. "Home," he whispered, though the word carried uncertainty rather than joy. "Yes," Commander Blackthorn said gently. "Your father will be so happy to see you." The carriage rolled to a stop in a courtyard paved with smooth gray stones. Before the wheels had fully stopped turning, the massive doors of the main hall burst open, and a man came running down the steps with desperate urgency. Alpha King Magnus was nothing like Malis had expected. Where she'd imagined cold authority and distant nobility, she saw instead a father's raw relief and desperate love. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with premature silver, his golden eyes, so like his son's, filled with tears. He made no attempt to hide. "Kale," he breathed, reaching the carriage just as Commander Blackthorn opened the door. "My son." Prince Kale launched himself from the carriage into his father's arms, and Malis watched through her own tears as the Alpha King held his child like he never intended to let go. Both father and son were sobbing openly now, their reunion a raw display of emotion that made Malis's heart ache with its beauty. "I thought I'd lost you," King Magnus whispered into his son's hair. "When they told me what happened, when we couldn't find you, I thought—" "Lydia saved me," Prince Kale said, his voice muffled against his father's shoulder. "She brought me to May." King Magnus's eyes found Malis over his son's head, and she saw gratitude so profound it took her breath away. She climbed down from the carriage on unsteady legs, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in her simple woolen dress and worn cloak among all this grandeur. "Your Majesty," she said, dropping into what she hoped was an appropriate curtsy. "No," King Magnus said firmly, adjusting Prince Kale in his arms so he could face her properly. "You don't bow to me. I bow to you." And to Malis's absolute shock, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories lowered his head in a gesture of respect that sent whispers rippling through the assembled courtiers. "You saved my son," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave him sanctuary when he needed it most. There is no debt greater than the one I owe you." "I only did what anyone would do," Malis said quietly, uncomfortable with the attention. "No," Prince Kale said, turning in his father's arms to look at her. "You did what May would do. You're special." The simple declaration from a 4-year-old prince carried more weight than any royal proclamation. Malis felt heat rising in her cheeks as she became aware of the dozens of eyes watching this exchange, studying her with mixtures of curiosity, gratitude, and calculation. "Come," King Magnus said, gesturing toward the palace doors. "We have much to discuss, and Kale needs to see the healers. I want to make sure he wasn't injured." As they walked through corridors that gleamed with polished marble and precious metals, Malis felt increasingly overwhelmed. Servants bowed as they passed, their eyes following her with undisguised fascination. She heard whispered conversations about the Omega who saved the prince, and the woman from the forest, and she realized that her quiet life of anonymity was over forever. Prince Kale insisted on walking beside her rather than being carried, his small hand still firmly clasped in hers. Whenever someone stared too intently or whispered too loudly, his golden eyes would fix on them with a look of such regal displeasure that they immediately found somewhere else to direct their attention. The royal healer, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Ashworth, examined Prince Kale in a suite of rooms that was larger than Malis's entire cabin. She pronounced him physically healthy, but emotionally fragile, recommending rest and familiar comforts to help him process his trauma. "He's been through something terrible," Dr. Ashworth told King Magnus quietly, though Prince Kale had fallen asleep on a velvet sofa and couldn't hear. "His body shows signs of accelerated healing, which suggests his wolf is trying to protect him, but the psychological wounds will take longer to mend." "What does he need?" the king asked. Dr. Ashworth glanced at Milas, who was sitting beside the sleeping prince, gently stroking his hair. Stability, security, and apparently, her. It was true. Throughout the examination, Prince Kale had grown agitated whenever Milas moved more than a few feet away, calming only when she returned to his side. Whatever bond had formed between them in her cabin had strengthened during their journey, becoming something that couldn't be ignored or easily broken. "We've prepared quarters for you in the guest wing," King Magnus told Malus as they left the healer's chambers. "Close enough that Kale can reach you if he needs to, but private enough that you'll have space to yourself." "Your Majesty," Malus said hesitantly, "I appreciate your hospitality, but I can't stay indefinitely. I have a life to return to." "Do you?" King Magnus stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression gentle but serious. "Because from what I understand, you've been living alone for years, avoiding pack affiliations and commitments. What exactly are you returning to?" The question stung because it was so accurate. What was waiting for her back at the cabin? Empty rooms, solitary meals, books that couldn't fill the silence that had grown so much deeper after experiencing the joy of caring for someone who needed her. "I'm not equipped for court life," she said instead. "I don't know the protocols, the expectations." "You don't need to know protocols," King Magnus interrupted. "You need to know how to love my son, and you've already proven you excel at that." They were interrupted by the arrival of a woman who radiated authority and barely contained fury. She was beautiful in a cold, perfect way, her platinum blonde hair styled in an elaborate updo, her ice blue gown clearly worth more than most people earned in a year. When she saw Melis, her lip curled in barely disguised disdain. "Magnus," she said, her voice like frost over steel, "I see you've brought the Forest Omega into the palace." "Lady Vivian," King Magnus said, his tone cooling noticeably. "I wasn't aware you'd returned from your travels. I came as soon as I heard about Kyle." Lady Vivian's gaze swept over Malus dismissively before settling on the king. "Really, Magnus, I understand you're grateful, but surely a monetary reward would be more appropriate than this." "This," King Magnus said with dangerous quiet, "is the woman who saved my son's life. She will be treated with the respect she deserves." Lady Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass. "Respect? She's a nobody Omega who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Surely you don't intend to keep her here permanently." "I intend," King Magnus said, his alpha authority finally showing through the careful control, "to give Prince Kale whatever he needs to heal. If he needs Malus, then she stays." The confrontation might have escalated, but Prince Kale's voice interrupted them. He'd awakened and was standing in the doorway of the healer's chambers, his golden eyes fixed on Lady Vivian with surprising coldness for someone so young. "Go away, Vivian," he said clearly. "May stays." Lady Vivian's face flushed with embarrassment at being dismissed so casually by a child, but she couldn't argue with a direct order from the prince. She inclined her head stiffly and swept away, her heels clicking angrily on the marble floors. "I'm sorry about that," King Magnus said quietly to Malus. "Lady Vivian has expectations regarding her place in the royal hierarchy." Malus understood without being told. Lady Vivian was clearly someone who'd expected to become queen, someone who saw Malus's presence as a threat to carefully laid plans. The political implications made her head spin. "I really think it would be better if I went home," she said. "No," Prince Kale said firmly, walking over to take her hand again. "May promised. You promised to stay with me." Had she promised? Looking down into his trusting golden eyes, Malus realized that perhaps she had, even if the words hadn't been spoken aloud. The moment she'd chosen to protect him, the moment she'd climbed into that carriage, she'd made a commitment she couldn't easily abandon. That evening, as Malus settled into quarters more luxurious than anything she'd ever imagined, she reflected on how completely her world had changed in just 2 days. The rooms were beautiful, silk wallpapers, crystal chandeliers, furniture that probably cost more than her cabin, but they felt cold and impersonal. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Prince Kale stood in the hallway wearing silk pajamas that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, holding a stuffed wolf that looked well-loved despite its expensive craftsmanship. "Can't sleep," he said simply. Milas opened her door wider, allowing him into her sitting room. He climbed onto the velvet sofa and patted the cushion beside him, clearly expecting her to join him. "Bad dreams?" she asked, settling beside him. He nodded, then surprised her by climbing into her lap and curling against her chest like he had that first night. They come back when I close my eyes. The scary men, the noise, Lydia crying. Melis's heart broke for him. It's normal to have bad dreams after something frightening happens. They'll get better with time. Will you stay until I fall asleep? He asked. Like before? Of course. She carried him to his enormous bed in the adjoining royal nursery and sat beside him as she had in her cabin, stroking his hair and humming soft melodies until his breathing evened out. But when she tried to leave, his small hand shot out to grasp her wrist. "Don't go," he whispered, still mostly asleep. "Please don't leave me alone." So Melis spent the night in a chair beside Prince Kael's bed, just as she had that first night. But this time, she wasn't just keeping watch over a frightened child found in a storm. She was protecting a prince, a future king, a little boy who'd lost his innocence too early and needed someone to help him find his way back to feeling safe. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to her chambers. King Magnus arrived just as Melis was finishing her breakfast, his expression serious, but not unkind. "We need to talk," he said gently, "about the future." Melis set down her teacup with trembling fingers. "I know I can't stay forever. Prince Kael will adjust." "That's not what this is about," King Magnus interrupted. "Yesterday, while you were settling in, I received reports from my investigators. The rebels who attacked the palace, they're still out there, and they're specifically targeting Kael." The words hit her like ice water. "But why? He's just a child." "He's the heir to the throne," King Magnus said grimly. "As long as he lives, he represents everything they want to destroy. The attack 3 days ago wasn't random violence. It was a coordinated assassination attempt, and they will try again." Melis felt the room spinning around her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that my son needs protection beyond what traditional guards can provide. He needs someone he trusts completely, someone who can stay close to him without arousing suspicion." King Magnus leaned forward, his golden eyes intense. "He needs you." "I'm not a warrior," Melis protested. "I'm just an Omega. I don't know how to fight or protect anyone." "You protected him when it mattered most," King Magnus pointed out. "You opened your door to a stranger in a storm. You gave him sanctuary when he had nowhere else to go. And most importantly, he trusts you completely." The weight of what he was asking settled over her like a heavy cloak. "You want me to become his permanent guardian. I want you to become his family," King Magnus said quietly. "I want you to be the mother he lost when the queen died in childbirth, the constant presence that makes him feel safe in a dangerous world. I want you to love him, and protect him, and help him grow into the king he's meant to become." Tears blurred Melis's vision. "I don't know how to raise a prince." "You don't need to know how to raise a prince," King Magnus said, echoing his words from the day before. "You need to know how to raise Kael, and from what I've seen, you're already perfect at that." A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation, the sound of running feet and urgent voices. Commander Blackthorn appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. Prince Kael is missing from his chambers." King Magnus was on his feet instantly, alpha authority radiating from him like heat. "When? How?" His guards report everything was normal when they checked on him an hour ago. When they went to wake him for breakfast, the room was empty. The window was open, but there are no signs of struggle. Melis felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "He didn't run away. He would never leave without telling me." "Then where?" King Magnus began, but Melis was already moving, following an instinct she couldn't explain. She ran through the corridors, her bare feet silent on the marble floors, following a pull she felt in her chest toward something precious that was in danger. Behind her, she could hear King Magnus and the guards following, but she didn't stop to explain. The pull led her outside, past the formal gardens, and toward a wooded area at the edge of the palace grounds. There, in a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks, she found Prince Kael. He was standing perfectly still, his small frame dwarfed by the enormous trees. But he wasn't alone. 3 figures in dark clothing surrounded him, 2 men and a woman, all wearing masks that covered the upper halves of their faces. "Rebels." "There she is," one of the men said, as Melis burst into the clearing. "The Omega who thinks she can play royal guardian." "Let him go," Melis said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He's just a child." "He's an abomination," the woman spat. "A symbol of everything that's wrong with our people. The crown should go to someone strong, someone worthy. not some traumatized child who clings to Omega nursemaids. Prince Kael's golden eyes found Malus across the clearing, and she saw fear there, but also something else: trust. He believed she would save him, just as she had that first night. The problem was, she had no idea how. "You made a mistake coming here alone," the second man said, pulling a wicked-looking knife from his belt. "Now we can eliminate both problems at once." That's when Malus felt it, a surge of something primal and protective that rose from the deepest part of her soul. Her wolf, which had always been gentle and submissive, suddenly blazed with fierce maternal fury. No one would hurt her child, not while she lived. The change that came over her was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Power flowed through her veins like molten gold, her senses sharpening to supernatural clarity, her body moving with speed and grace she'd never possessed. She didn't shift. That would have taken too long. Instead, she moved as a human enhanced by wolf strength, crossing the clearing in seconds and placing herself between Prince Kael and his attackers. "May!" Prince Kael cried, running to her and wrapping his arms around her waist. The rebels attacked simultaneously, but Malus met them with a ferocity that shocked everyone, including herself. She fought like a mother wolf defending her cub, all strategy abandoned in favor of pure, protective instinct. She had no training, no experience with combat, but she had something more powerful: the absolute refusal to let anything harm the child under her protection. When King Magnus and his guards burst into the clearing, they found 3 unconscious rebels, and Malus kneeling beside Prince Kael, checking him for injuries with shaking hands. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from the adrenaline crash. "No," Prince Kael said, his small hands cupping her face. "You saved me again." Later, as the rebels were taken into custody and the immediate crisis passed, King Magnus found Malus sitting in her chambers, staring out the window with a dazed expression. "I don't understand what happened out there," she said quietly. "I'm not a fighter. I've never been strong or fierce or brave. You're a mother," King Magnus said simply, settling into the chair beside her. "And a mother protecting her child is the most dangerous force in the world." "He's not my child," Malus protested weakly. "Isn't he?" King Magnus asked gently. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've claimed him as surely as if you'd given birth to him yourself, and he's claimed you right back." As if summoned by their conversation, Prince Kael appeared in the doorway. He was clean and dressed in fresh clothes, but his eyes immediately sought Malus with the desperation of someone who needed constant reassurance that his anchor was still there. "May," he said, running to her and climbing into her lap with the ease of long practice. "Don't leave. Please don't ever leave. Please don't." Looking down at his earnest face, feeling the complete trust and love in his small arms around her neck, Malus finally understood what King Magnus had been trying to tell her. This wasn't about duty or obligation or royal gratitude. This was about love. Pure, unconditional, transformative love between a woman who'd thought herself meant to be alone and a child who needed her more than he needed anything else in the world. "I won't leave," she promised, the words carrying the weight of a sacred vow. "I'll stay for as long as you need me." "Forever?" Prince Kael asked hopefully. "Forever," Malus agreed, and felt the last pieces of her heart settle into place. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new complexities as she learned to navigate her role as the unofficial mother to a prince. But tonight, she held her son, because that's what he was now, in every way that mattered, and knew that she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand quests or noble purposes, but with the simple decision to open your door when someone needs help. And sometimes, the most important kingdom you can protect isn't made of castles and crowns, but of trust and love, and the sacred bond between a mother and child who found each other exactly when they both needed saving. In the growing darkness of her chambers, Malus held Prince Kael close and whispered the same words she'd spoken that first stormy night. "You're safe now. I've got you." And for the first time since his ordeal began, Prince Kael truly believed it. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the royal nursery, where Malus sat reading to a group of children gathered around her feet. Prince Kael, now 9 years old, and every inch the future king, listened with the same rapt attention as the younger children, though he could have recited the story from memory. And so the little Omega discovered that sometimes the greatest magic isn't in being strong or fierce, Malis read, her voice carrying the warm cadence of countless bedtime stories, but in simply refusing to turn away when someone needs help. Tell the part about the scary men again, piped up Princess Luna, King Magnus's 3-year-old daughter with his new queen. She had inherited her father's golden eyes and her stepmother's courage, and an alarming tendency to befriend every creature she met. The scary men aren't the important part of the story, Kyle said seriously, his voice carrying the unconscious authority that had only grown stronger with age. The important part is that May chose love over fear. Malis smiled, reaching out to ruffle his dark hair. He was growing so fast, already showing signs of the powerful alpha he would become, but he still sought her comfort when nightmares came, still saved the last bite of his favorite desserts to share with her. Very wise, my prince, she said softly. A gentle knock at the door interrupted the reading circle. Queen Isabel entered, her infant son, 6-month-old Prince Adrian, sleeping peacefully in her arms. She was everything Lady Vivian had not been. Kind, intelligent, and secure enough in her own worth to embrace, rather than compete with the bond between Malis and Kale. I'm sorry to interrupt story time, Queen Isabel said, settling gracefully into a nearby chair. But Magnus wanted to speak with you, Malis. Something about the new security protocols. Malis nodded, closing the book. The threats against the royal family had never completely disappeared, but they'd learned to build their lives around joy rather than fear. Kale was trained in self-defense now, always accompanied by discreet guards, but he was also allowed to be a child, to run through the gardens, to laugh too loudly in the corridors, to curl up with Malis when he needed reassurance. Finish the story without me, she told the children, standing and smoothing her dress. Over the years, her wardrobe had evolved to match her position, but she still favored simple, comfortable clothing in soft colors. I'll be back for lunch. Promise? Kale asked, though at 9, he was trying to appear more grown-up and less dependent. Promise, she confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. King Magnus's office had changed little in 5 years, though new portraits now graced the walls. Formal paintings of the growing royal family, but also candid sketches that captured quieter moments. Milas's favorite was a charcoal drawing of her and Kale reading together in the garden, both of them laughing at something on the page. You wanted to see me? She asked, settling into the familiar chair across from his desk. King Magnus looked up from a stack of papers, his expression warm but serious. I had an interesting conversation with Commander Blackthorn this morning. She's recommended you for formal recognition in the Order of the Royal Guard. Malis blinked in surprise. I'm not a guard, Your Majesty. No, you're not, Magnus agreed, leaning back in his chair. You're something far more valuable. In 5 years, there hasn't been a single successful attempt against Kale's life. Not one. Do you know why? Better security? Malis suggested weakly. Better love, Magnus corrected. The rebels have learned that to get to my son, they'd have to go through you first. And after what happened in that clearing 5 years ago, most of them aren't willing to risk it. The memory still made her shiver sometimes. Not with fear, but with wonder at what she'd been capable of when someone she loved was threatened. The power that had flowed through her that day had never fully retreated. She was still gentle, still preferred books to battles, but now there was steel beneath the softness that everyone could sense. There's something else, Magnus continued. I've been in correspondence with the High Council about formalizing your position here. They want to offer you a title, Duchess of Moonwater, in honor of your grandmother's service to the crown. Malis felt dizzy. A title? But you're the woman who saved the heir to the throne and has spent 5 years raising him with more wisdom and love than most people show their own children, Magnus interrupted. You're the unofficial Queen Mother, the person both my children run to when they're hurt or scared or excited. Your family, Malis. It's time the kingdom recognized that officially. Tears blurred her vision. A title meant security, recognition, the legal right to make decisions about Kale's welfare if something happened to his father. But more than that, it meant belonging. Truly, officially belonging to the family she'd chosen, and who had chosen her in return. I don't need titles or recognition, she said softly. I have everything I need. I know you don't need it, Magnus said gently, but Kale will. Someday he'll be king, and he'll need advisors he trusts completely. Having you formally recognized as family gives him the legal authority to keep you close, to rely on your counsel, to ensure that the bond between you is protected by law as well as love. It was a practical consideration wrapped in emotional truth. By accepting the title, she wasn't just securing her own position. She was ensuring that Cale would never have to choose between duty and the person who understood him best. When? She asked. Next month, during the Harvest Festival. Cale specifically requested that the ceremony be held then. He said it was fitting, since that's when families come together to celebrate what they've grown. Of course he had. At 9, Cale already understood symbolism and timing with an intuition that would serve him well as king. A commotion in the hallway interrupted their conversation. Running feet, excited voices, and what sounded suspiciously like a dog barking. The office door burst open to reveal Cale, his formal clothes disheveled and his face bright with excitement. "May! Papa! You have to come see!" he exclaimed, bouncing on his toes. "Luna found a litter of abandoned wolf pups in the garden, and she's trying to convince Mother to let her keep all of them." Magnus and Malus exchanged amused glances. Princess Luna's tendency to rescue every creature in need was a trait she'd clearly inherited from her stepmother. "How many pups?" Malus asked, already knowing she was going to end up helping to care for whatever Luna had discovered. 6, Cale announced. "And they're so small, May. They need someone to take care of them. I suppose we should go assess the situation," Magnus said, standing with the resigned air of a man who knew he was about to be outnumbered by his children's combined determination. As they walked through the corridors toward the garden, Kyle slipped his hand into Milus's with the unconscious ease of long habit. He was growing tall and strong, already showing signs of the powerful alpha he would become, but he still sought her touch when he was excited or nervous, or simply wanted to share a moment of connection. "May," he said quietly as they walked, "when I'm king, will you stay with me? Will you help me make good decisions?" The question caught her off guard with its seriousness. "Of course I will, if that's what you want. It's what I need," Kyle said simply. "Kings need advisors they trust, and I trust you more than anyone." They emerged into the garden to find Queen Isabel sitting on a stone bench, trying to reason with Princess Luna, who was surrounded by 6 of the smallest, fluffiest wolf pups Malus had ever seen. The pups were clearly hungry and frightened, their small bodies huddled together for warmth. "They don't have a mama," Luna announced as soon as she saw her father and Malus. "We have to help them." "Luna, darling," Queen Isabel said patiently, 6 wolf pups is a lot of responsibility. "May will help," Luna said with absolute confidence, turning those enormous golden eyes on Malus. "Won't you, May? You're good at taking care of things that need families." Standing there in the sunlight, surrounded by the family she'd never expected to have, looking down at 6 abandoned creatures who needed exactly what she'd always been best at providing, Malus felt the familiar stirring of protective instinct. "I suppose we could try," she said, earning delighted squeals from Luna and a knowing smile from King Magnus. "You realize this means you'll have a pack of wolves following you around the castle," Magnus warned, but he was already signaling for servants to bring supplies. "I've had worse followers," Malus replied, glancing meaningfully at Kyle, who grinned and deliberately stepped on her foot. As the afternoon wore on, the abandoned pups were settled into a warm corner of the nursery, fed with bottles, and thoroughly spoiled by every member of the royal family. Malus found herself once again in the role she'd been born to play: the caretaker, the nurturer, the one who opened her arms to creatures who needed sanctuary. That evening, as she was tucking Cale into bed, he surprised her with a question that had clearly been weighing on his mind. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "Your cabin in the forest? Being alone?" Malus considered the question seriously. Did she miss the quiet solitude, the simple routines, the freedom from responsibility and expectation? Sometimes, in the chaos of court life, she remembered those peaceful mornings with something like nostalgia. "Sometimes I miss the quiet," she said honestly, sitting on the edge of his bed. "But I've learned that there are different kinds of peace. There's the peace of being alone, and there's the peace of being exactly where you belong." "And you belong here?" Kyle asked. "With us?" "I belong with you," Malus corrected gently. "Whether that's here in a palace or in a cottage in the woods or somewhere we haven't discovered yet. Home isn't a place, sweetheart. It's the people who love you no matter what." Cale smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something bright and joyful. "Then I'm always home when you're with me." And I'm always home when you're with me," she replied, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Sweet dreams, my prince." "Sweet dreams, May." As Mayless made her way back to her own chambers, she reflected on the strange turns life could take. 5 years ago, she'd been a lonely Omega living in self-imposed exile, convinced she was meant for solitude. Now she was about to become a duchess, the unofficial mother to a future king, and the guardian of 6 abandoned wolf pups who would probably grow up to be the most spoiled animals in the kingdom. She paused at her window, looking out over the moonlit gardens where she'd first realized what she was capable of when someone she loved was threatened. In the distance, she could see the forest where her old cabin still stood, maintained by the royal staff but empty most of the year. Sometimes she and Kyle went there for quiet retreats, when the pressures of court became too much, and they both needed to remember where their bond had begun. He would sleep in her bed while she kept watch from the chair beside it, and in the morning they would walk through the woods, where she'd once thought she'd spend the rest of her life alone. But she'd been wrong about so many things back then. She'd thought kindness was weakness, that love was a luxury she couldn't afford, that her gentle nature made her unsuitable for the harsh realities of the world. Instead, she'd learned that kindness could be the fiercest force of all, that love was not a luxury, but a necessity, and that sometimes the gentlest hearts were exactly what the world needed most. A soft knock at her door interrupted her musings. Kyle stood in the hallway, holding one of the wolf pups in his arms. "She was crying," he explained. "I thought maybe she was lonely." Milas smiled, opening her door wider. "Bring her in. We'll keep her company until she falls asleep." As they settled on her sofa with the tiny wolf curled between them, Malis thought about all the lost creatures who had found their way to her door over the years. A frightened prince in a storm, abandoned pups in need of care, even herself, though she hadn't realized it at the time. "May?" Kyle said sleepily, his head resting against her shoulder. "Thank you." "For what, sweetheart?" "For answering the door that night. For choosing to help when you could have stayed safe." "Thank you for knocking," she replied, stroking his hair as his breathing evened out into sleep. Outside her window, the moon sailed across a clear sky, its light blessing the kingdom spread out below. Somewhere in the forest, her old cabin stood empty but ready, waiting for the next lost soul who might need sanctuary. And here in the palace, surrounded by the family she'd never expected to find, Malis kept watch over a sleeping prince and a wolf pup, both of them safe and loved and exactly where they belonged. Sometimes the greatest adventures didn't begin with quests or prophecies or calls to destiny. Sometimes they began with the simple decision to answer when someone knocked on your door in the middle of a storm. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that moment of kindness would transform not just one life, but an entire kingdom's future. In her arms, Prince Kale shifted in his sleep, murmuring something that sounded like, "home." The wolf pup opened one golden eye, looked at Milas with perfect trust, and settled back into peaceful dreams. And in her heart, Malis whispered a prayer of gratitude for the storm that had brought them all together, for the courage to open her door when it mattered most, and for the love that had grown from a single act of kindness into something strong enough to change the world. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.